Nous allons commencer. Si les derniers peuvent...
We are going to start. I invite the last persons to join us.
Auprès de quoi? Ah, ok, ça va. Désolée. Ah, donc, voilà. En tout cas, bonjour et bienvenue. Ça va là? Oui, tout va bien. Bon.
So, good afternoon to all of you. And I say this for all male and female participants. On this colloquium on sexual and sexist violence at the workplace. It's a colloquium organized with the collaboration of Amazon and puts an end to 2 years of work on this item, which allowed us to create a tool for all of the stakeholders of the enterprise that we will introduce during this colloquium. I will give you some instructions, and we seem to have trouble with the sound. For COVID reasons, you are all required to wear a face mask. We are not required to keep distancing when we are wearing a mask, but the speakers will be allowed to take off their masks while they are presenting. This is one of the aspects. The colloquium will take place in 3 languages, Dutch, English, and French, so you have the possibility of using a headset to follow it in the language that you wish. And as this colloquium is following a hybrid format through Zoom, the remote participants will be able to choose the language they wish to listen to as they want. The symposium will have 2 parts, and then interrupted by a break at around 3:30, 4 p.m. Brussels time. Second part, and then you will be able to have a drink to end the meeting. In this first part, we will introduce the symposium thanks to the presence of the Ministry of State, Madame Nawal Hamou, is my colleague Inge, who is going to introduce her.
Mevrouw Nawal Hamou start haar professionele loopbaan bij de politiezone Brussel-Elsene.
Señora, Mrs. Hamou started. She joined the General Centre of the Public Servants, and she's been active for the Socialist Party. She has been the youngest deputy of the Federal Parliament, and her favorite topics are safety, fight against terrorism, training of police, civil service, and discrimination against women, in particular, also the health of women. Since 2019, Nawal is Secretary of State for the housing in Brussels capital. During this legislation, she fought for the right for decent housing and the fight against discrimination. So it's my pleasure to invite Mrs. Secretary of State to talk about sexism and sexist violence at work.
Voilà.
So,
super.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction. Hi to everyone. I'm very happy to be with you today. Nawal is making a small joke on her size. I'm very happy to be with you today. Thank you for this movement for equality between women and men, for organizing this symposium and for choosing this very important topic. There's no need to demonstrate it. Sexist and sexual violence are something women have to cope with every day in their job. It was considered as a lesser important phenomenon so far, but now people are becoming aware of this problem. You cannot behave as if this problem was inexistent. The disaster, because of disastrous repercussions for the victims, for the women who are faced with this violence at their workplace every day. It is true that the repressive arsenal is already well furnished, but we have to push the victims to talk about that issue and do not stay alone with the perpetrators of these acts. Violence at the workplace must be reported to the courts. It's also important to consider sexism at work through as a part of the violence to women, and this must be considered in a transversal way. So within my competencies, I wanted to install this policy of transversality as a philosophy of the first plan of Brussels for the fight combating violence against women. We have approximately 20 rules in this plan, which was elaborated 1 year ago in collaboration with all the ministers and state secretaries and of the civil services of the region. This cross-cutting approach counts with investments, and I could count on my colleagues to work with me against this sexist violence within their own competencies. My colleagues for employment and civil function already took concrete actions, and this is how, for example, the consultants of Actiris were formed by the FEMH, thanks for questions on the harassment and sexual violence at work, to better accompany the companies in the implementation of diversity plans. Talent Brussels organizes, in partnership with the Institute for Equality Between Men and Women, trainings on sexism and harassment in the workplace and their impact on the relationships at the workplace, and also an impact from training on impact of violence. The persons of confidence and will also have a practical tool they can use to detect and guide victims of violence between the different partners. This plan is also using all the regional competencies to fight sexism on the street and in public spaces, because the city must also be accessible to all users and make sure that women can take ownership of it and that they can move safely from one place to the other in our city. Integration of the gender dimension in all the policies on construction organization of our city and townships are important. It must be accessible to all. So we simply need to develop an integrated approach to the equality between men and women and a cross-cutting strategy for the city. In public transportation, the safety of women is also an important stake, making this a safer place for them. And the staff of the mobility is also trained for that. This is also important for the emancipation and autonomization of everyone. Of course, many things have been done, but there's still a lot of work to do. And we need tools like the ones that we will discover today to improve our arsenal. And you may count on me to promote it with my colleagues of the civil service and employment to raise awareness amongst the women which are victims of violence, and also all the people who have a word to say to fight violence in a more efficient way, so that women can have a serene way of working. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I will now ask the three following speakers to come to the rostrum so that we can all see them. I'm going to call Mrs. Floriane CHARLES, Mrs. Tamara EELSING, and Mr. Thierry DUQUESNE. I will start by introducing Mrs. Floriane CHARLES. She is working for Actiris and she is the diversity manager. She's been diversity manager for 1 year. So the idea is to make the services of the public administration more inclusive so that each worker will feel included, promoting human contact, taking on board the developments of society. She's been working in the fight against gender discrimination and integration. Floriane, you have the floor. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure you can see me so that I can comment on the slides. I joined Actiris a year ago as a diversity manager, and I want to thank you for having invited Actiris. I am representing, therefore, Actiris in the capacity of an employer. So diversity and well-being is part of our well-being, is part of our DNA. And in fact, this is part and parcel of our contract. This is a strategic objective that we want to achieve in our management contract. And we have several people working on this in the general management.
Je peux parler sans micro. Quelqu'un peut venir m'écouter. C'est pour le Zoom en fait qu'on a un problème. Okay. Est-ce que je peux allez-y, on va... Un petit souci. C'est au niveau du son, dès que j'active le son pour partager le son d'ici, mais inversement du coup, je me perds d'activer le son. Parce que je crois qu'ils sont internes. Ça c'est pas grave. Que tout le son soit coupé, ça change rien. Le partage du son, en fait, c'est interne au PC. C'est juste des speakers qui sont coupés. Ok, d'accord. Donc je coupe les speakers. Non, mais je partage le son, c'est ça, exactement. Pour être sûr, je vais repartager. Faut couper les micros de l'accès Zoom. Ok. Du coup, je coupe mon micro là. Ah oui, tu peux. Bien sûr. Voilà, désolée. Oui, donc c'est dans le...
As I was saying, diversity is really part of our objective number 9, which is to invest in well-being at work and developing and enhancing the team's skill. So in the general directorate where I work, we have we are diversity, and then there is active, inclusive actions to raise awareness on these issues. Then we also have a service, a department fighting against discrimination to help those who are seeking a job and feel victim of discrimination. I'm not working on my own. I have made sure that there is synergy with trusted persons, advisors, internal, external, trade unions, inclusive officers, and then we have the well-being officer and the occupational medicine representative. So since I'm the employer, who are those who work with us, who are our partners? We have a payroll of close to 1,600 employees. 65% are women, and 61% of managers have identified themselves as women. And then if you look at their work status, there is the same ratio, namely that women are strongly represented at level 1 and level 2. The total mean age of our workforce is 41 years old. Out of 25 persons with a disability, 21 benefit from reasonable accommodation. And in 2020, the majority of parental leave for corona virus or parental leave tout court have been granted primarily to women, 76% in one case and 86% in one case. 46% are of Belgian origin and 53% of foreign origin. This is important because in the framework of harassment and discrimination, there can be crossed or double discrimination. So why has Actiris been involved in responding to harassment and the fight against sexism? Well, in 2020, IFH received 736 reports on discrimination in the field of recruitment, selection, pregnancy. 80% of women say that they have experienced ordinary, subtle sexism, mansplaining, interrupting, appropriating. 72% of the victims declared that this violence suffered at work has really generated stress, anxiety, depression, motivation, and a poor team context. The effect is that because of fear of losing their job, there is underreporting. In terms of protection and well-being of our employees, we need to act, but also to have a role as a model employer. We wanted to act. So how did we go about doing that? First of all, we wanted to engage at all levels of the administration. We wanted to be able to quantify, to measure, to fight underreporting, raise awareness, train, and obviously act. In terms of our commitment, first of all, there is an external action to support the Brussels plan to combat violence against women 2020-2024. The former representative will be presented here. We have the member of the SEAS network, Regional Committee of Diversity Managers Association of Belgium, which means that we are quite present outside the company because we want to have an exchange of good practice and have a good impact on society. And obviously we have partnership agreements with UNIA and with the Institute. So this is an external commitment, but we also have an internal commitment. First, on the part of senior management, it's a public commitment, but it's also an attitude, exemplary behavior, zero tolerance. And this is part and parcel of internal regulations. Not complying is a serious reason for being dismissed. We want to be inclusive in terms of organizational culture, and this applies to all the stakeholders from top to bottom. And obviously, we want to have a participatory diversity plan, which should be anchored in our respective cultures, not just for top management, but also in the field. So how do we measure, how do we quantify? Because as I was saying, there has been a lot of underreporting in employment. There is some dichotomy, some power struggle between the employer and the victim. First of all, we measure satisfaction. We look at morale. We try to look at the different criteria for which are indicative of discrimination or harassment. We also keep a record which is kept by trusted persons, by social workers and trade unions to have a specific incident log, and we obviously monitor discrimination against staff. One of the important aspects is to raise awareness and to educate before and after anything has happened. So when people are recruited, information is given about inclusion policy. And we want to remind people of the Actiris values. All hired personnel must follow the EDIV tool within 6 months of being recruited. This is to make sure that we are aware of legislation and regulation framework. We have a biannual diversity plan, which allows for some actions, internal awareness actions, such as during the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and White Pine Action. We also want to look at internal trends and communicate about parental leave, because parental leave is something that mostly women apply for. So we want to remove stereotypes by encouraging men to take parental leave. And we also want to promote wellness and inclusion thanks to the Institute training. And this is done for the social partners, for the trusted persons, and for members of the social assistance department. There is also specific training for managers, learning more about humor, gender-based humor, sexism, harassment, and gender at work. If we talk about men and women, there is a non-binary aspect that needs to be taken into consideration, and then specific training for human resources managers. We also act. We take action. One of the tools most efficient is to have a clear procedure, efficient in terms of dealing with complaints. There is a zero tolerance. Sanctions are taken against perpetrators, whether male or female. We also have an anti-discrimination guideline to allow a person who feels discriminated against by a colleague, by an employer, by a fellow worker. So all three possibilities are considered. So we want to inform about resources available. Who is going to be the resource person who could provide accompaniment in such a situation? We have a social service department with a special entity to be able to hear some of the cases, and this has been reinforced in COVID time. This information is available to all independently thanks to the intranet. Someone can complain saying, I'm the victim of violence at work. What can I do? In terms of accessibility, it means that information is also given on the billboards because people don't necessarily know how to use the intranet. And of course, we have some documents available. We display toll-free numbers where people can get access to more information and where they can be sure that their contact will remain anonymous. Some people have this fear, but we wanted people to be able to be as independent as possible in dealing with what happens to them. What we've also done is go a step further because we want to act against collective violence. And this means that we needed to evaluate our diversity plan before coming up with a new one for the new period of time. And also, we're conducting a new survey on internal satisfaction of our employees to check on perceived sexist issues, and then the Brussels plan to combat violence against women. I'm sure I would have a lot more to say after listening to my colleague's presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And I wish you all a fruitful conference.
I'm taking the mic over for a couple of minutes. I just want to mention that those who are present in the webinar and are following it online, you can ask the questions in the chat and we will take them into account when we will have our Q&A session at the end of the symposium. You will also be able at that time to raise your questions if you have any. Our next speaker is Mrs. Tamara EELSING from the Brussels Transport Authority, STIB. Tamara is a diversity manager at the and is one of the most important employer in the transport in Brussels. The Brussels Transport Authority has a diversity policy which is very well developed. Tamara is in charge of the strategic policy, its implementation, and this is precisely what she appreciates most in her work. Today she's going to present a campaign fruit of her work that she started in 2020, and it's a campaign on the fight against sexism within the company.
Okay. On entend encore un petit peu le côté technique.
Tu n'es pas obligé de... Non.
Ja. Dus ik ga het in het Nederlands doen. Het is mij gevraagd om het in het Nederlands te doen vandaag.
I was asked to do my presentation in Dutch today. Says Tamara to start. I know that there are many people that are listening to the interpretation, and some of the people present here are Dutch speaking. So indeed, we launched an important campaign against sexism in the company. Hi, Isabella. Tamara is saluting a colleague. I would like to introduce part of the campaign. I can't give you all the elements because this would take far too much time. But to give you some basic explanation, in 2018, we launched a broad external campaign for the public transport, with the idea of stimulating people and ask them to react whenever they were witnessing harassment in the public transportation. This is a very common place for harassment to occur. There is a physical proximity which leads some people to commit this kind of acts. We launched this campaign for the victims mainly, but also for witnesses. And we explained in this campaign how victims can react and what we can do as witnesses. Safety remains a primary concern, but you need, of course, to be able and to dare express yourself and to stop this kind of actions to occur. For this campaign, we could count on a great number of people and collaborators who told us this campaign is very nice, but we workers are also victims, and the same is true for clients. And with our colleagues, we might have the same kind of issues. There are only 12% of women employed in our company, and this is why we defined 4 axes to work on. Passengers among themselves, which are dealing with sexistic behaviors, passengers that have this kind of behavior towards tram drivers and bus drivers and metro drivers too. And we are talking mainly about sexist insults or insults related to gender. These cases occur between collaborators, but also occur from collaborators towards passengers. And this is how we were forced to furlough one of our workers who had inappropriate behavior towards a passenger. In the framework of such a campaign with our collaborators, we thought that it could be more efficient. Within our campaign, we didn't want to limit our action to our organization, and we opted for a cross-cutting working group. Within this group, we have several partners, people in charge of safety and security, staff members who are responsible for social, corporate responsibility, people that are taking care of homeless. You have the people in charge of social relations, and that's me, and also the STIB Academy, or the training academy of the Brussels Transport Authority. We haven't been able to meet as much as we wanted because of the COVID crisis, but we examined the situation in the field. We've been facing 2 kinds of situations. On one side, you had all the people, all the women saying that, of course, when you're young and wearing miniskirt, you can't expect men not to react. And then we also had people saying, well, who were saying, if I were to be saluted inappropriately, they would certainly receive reaction from me. So we had two different groups, the people that were more tolerant and say, well, of course, flirting is always possible, and other people who would say, no, we have to put a stop on this. So it was very difficult to find a intermediate position. So we realized there were three kind of people that considered that sexism was acceptable, and then other people saying that, okay, it's not a problem, well, saying that women should not be driving, for example, they would remain at home. So you must recognize that you have many staff workers that have this position, and then there was a group of people who were occupying a place in between these opinions. You can, of course, invest in people who are already convinced, or in people that will never be convinced, but that's spending the money to get no result. So we have to focus on the people that still need to be convinced, and these are the people that are deserving all our efforts. So we focused our campaign on an internal campaign, an awareness raising campaign to improve the well-being and the let's say kind atmosphere in the workplace, and we focused on sexism and sexist harassment, and we decided to take a distance from sexual violence, because this is a job for the external prevention advisor. It is important to realize that everyone should accept information, and that the externals believe that we are taking their place, because in those cases where needed, ladies should turn to the prevention advisors. And so, but we wanted to propose an alternate channel before, a step before the victims could turn towards the prevention counselor. The target population is all STIB workers, managers, which have to give an example, of course, and also the people working at human resources, because these people are the first line of admission of complaints. We used the digital channels for this campaign, but we also started in September with visits on the different workplaces of the Brussels Transport Authority, and to encourage people to talk with us. That is, the first thing was, as I say, to raise awareness amongst staff and reinforce, strengthen that message, saying that sexism is unacceptable. And the third goal we had was to give the opportunity to victims to talk about about sexism they're subject to. And the channels that we use are several channels that people already know on sexism, and we also want to give the people tools they can use to fight these behaviors. And it is important also for the hierarchy to know what their responsibilities are. Finally, the social advisors and the confidential counselors. We added the trade union representatives. We followed a several day-long training, because it's very often the trade union representatives who are the first person that people turn to whenever they are confronted with sexist behavior. But if those people do not know what sexism is like, or if people say that the victims are exaggerating. Many managers say, for example, yes, of course, we know that person. She's very well known for exaggerating every issue she comes across. Very often there is no help to that person. So our idea was to give an opportunity to all these people who are involved to be helping the victims. On one of our lines, we saw this picture, and it really made us laugh a lot. In our campaign, we wanted to say in our messages that sexism goes against the values of the Brussels Transport Authority, STIB, that sexism is forbidden by law and that there are penalties for that, that sexism is not only an issue for women, that everyone is concerned, being it the perpetrators, the victims, and the witnesses. We also explained that witnesses have a very important role to play in the fight against sexism. The base message being, let's talk about it, and please talk about it. So talking is really the message. Silence must be broken. We sometimes meet people who went through the same kind of situation, and talking about it with others allows you to overcome the frustration this situation generates. And for the managers, the message is intervene at once. So we divided the information in three facets. The first thing is to know what sexism is, why it's important, what are the sanctions that are appending to it. The second one is to recognize sexism when it occurs, in part for the collaborators or staff members who follow our training. And then the third aspect is acting. What can we do as a manager? What can we do as a witness? And therefore we defined the different dissemination channels. We have developed e-learnings. We prepared 3 video clips, posters. We have Z-cards and our blue bus traveling all through the city that we use for several events, but that we will be also using internally from now on. As for the videos, we find again the 3 focuses: know, recognize, and act. And for recognizing, I want to show you a small video clip so you can see what our campaign looks like and the message we want to disseminate. We have 3 very different cases represented in these video clips. One situation relates to a bus driver, and this is what I'm going to show you. And then we have a situation depicted in an office. And finally, an occurrence during the coffee break. This is Nadia. It's been years that she takes a bus. There are not many. It's a world where men are present. She's very strong, and she says no one considers her as one of us, and she realizes that. The remarks she receives seem innocent, but she feels not appreciated to her true value, and she feels not at ease. However, her workplace is supposed to be a safe place, and if you're a victim or witness of inappropriate behavior, talk about it. Say no to sexism, say yes to respect, or come to YouGo to find a solution to your problem, or scan this QR code. So this was one of the video clips, and in the third part we react. We show exactly the same video with the witnesses, the lady standing behind Naga, what she could have done if she was in her place. And we explained that these are things that are not tolerated within the Brussels Transport Authority. The work of Donatien counted with 10,000 workers for e-learning, and with these 2-minute clips. But this really represents a lot of work if everybody follows e-learning. So we needed to have a very short version, shorter than the 1.5 hour of the training Donatien is taking care of. So we really went straight to the point, and we received very positive reactions from bus drivers, controllers, etc. So the e-learning indeed follows the same scenario. The first thing is to recognize, to know, to recognize, to act. In the first part, we talk about sexism, what has already been shown in the videos, and then we discuss around it to see what can be done and what are the sanctions that are pending to this behavior. And you have the e-learning is a open program. You can choose whatever you want to see. It is based on true cases, but they're totally fictitious situations. And now I'm going to let you hear one of the persons who participated. Her name is George. We tried not to concentrate or focus on women exclusively, but also for the LGBTI community, to show that men can also be victims of sexism, and to get away from this stereotype of it's always women who are affected. You want to know something? Well, I tell my manager that I have to stop a bit earlier. And then she says, this is not my job, this is my woman's job, but she works too. And of course, if you have this mentality, you will never be a manager. That's what I'm told. So what should I do? Leave my children at home, at school? So this is the example of George. We work with this kind of testimonies, and we talked with the actors who played the role of the witnesses, and they believe this is very interesting. A third part of the e-learning is action. And here we added a part for the managers, things that only managers can be aware of, and how they're supposed to react. And we practice the actions that have to be taken, so that the people know exactly what they have to do. So what remains to be done now? The next step, the staff on the field will follow this e-learning. And this, as a matter of fact, is part of our plan aiming at fighting sexism at the workplace. And the idea is having all our staff members able to take care of a victim of harassment or sexism. I can't promise, of course, that all our staff members will be fit, psychologically speaking, to take care of the victims, but at least that they can show a minimum of empathy with the victims, and that they know where to direct the victims to, because some people are suffering shock when they are subject to this kind of behavior. All the information which is important is given, and then the victim is sent to the police station or to a telephone number in order to get over the problem. The campaign is still ongoing. We are discussing about the organization of the campaign. We would like it to be compulsory, and by the end of June I will return to the Commission just to make sure that this campaign becomes compulsory for all workers. So I thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you were able to follow my presentation, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon.
Merci beaucoup. Donc après ces deux
After these two presentations showing companies that are in contact with the public at large, we're now going to be listening to Mr. Thierry DUQUESNE, who works for Nautaduthil. He's an associate lawyer with the law firm Nautaduthil. He's going to tell us about companies he's dealing with and who are confronted with such cases. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. And actually, you will see that it's not going to be all that different, because the basis has already been presented, which is reassuring, because in a certain way, what our clients are experiencing is not all that different from what has already been presented. I'd like to say a few words about the law firm I'm working for and explain what we've decided to do in order to have a diversity policy and to implement a zero tolerance policy towards our own clients, not just internally. I'd like also to talk about the issue of dismissal. What happens when the perpetrator is dismissing people? And then CMU is a case that has made the headlines. I'm not going to tell you too much about it, but I will explain why this issue is important for our present society. So our law firm is in Benelux, 400 all in all in the whole of the Benelux territory, and there are about 100 working in Brussels, and we've decided to transfer the values that we have at home at the workplace, because we felt that it would not be normal to have a workplace that would have different values from those that we have in our own household. And so we've organized a raising awareness campaign, because we wanted to have a diversity label issued by Actiris. Takes 2 years, actually. It's not that you get the label and it's over. You need to keep on working with Actiris for 2 years, develop a plan, and once you have achieved the objectives that you have determined, then you have the label diversity. We made it, and we were the first law firm to receive the Actiris diversity label, and we're happy about it. Amongst the measures that were adopted, we wanted to have a zero tolerance policy towards sexism. So how do you go about doing that internally in the company, but also towards our own clients who might have inappropriate behavior vis-à-vis our own staff? And it's not that complicated, actually, because if you have such a project and the majority of the associates have already signed the charter, the diversity charter, it means everyone is on board and willing to do it. But it's a lot more complicated with education of clients. And I'm not going to lie to you. The member of staff who's wearing a miniskirt and is entering the boardroom, and everyone is looking at her, especially clients, it's not over yet. In fact, once she sits around the table and no one is ever going to talk to her, at least not our clients, it continues to happen on a regular basis. And we felt that we needed to react to such situations. Of course, we have an economic, we're doing business with the clients. So it's hard to tell clients, you know, please be polite vis-à-vis members of our staff. So we needed to have a subtle way to go about it. And so we needed to convey the message that this was inappropriate behavior and that maybe the person was extremely important for his case because it's how the internal file is going to be handled. So we communicate, first of all, to our clients that we have a diversity plan, zero tolerance. So they know it, but it's not going to change anything. But when the member of staff comes in the room and you introduce, because she worked late last night and without her, we would not have been able to have the meeting. This is something, this is going to give value to the person. And then if you give her the floor to explain how we came to reach the results that we have achieved. And then when you give the telephone number of the member of staff, because she is the one who knows your case best, and so you're giving value to the person. So if you don't enhance the equality aspect of all those present around the table, you're going to be confronted with such situations. It's not the majority of cases, but if you don't do that, you continue to run the risk of having gender-based attitudes on the part of your clients. So the fight is not over yet. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. Number two, I'd like to tell you about a dismissal of perpetrators working for our clients. And they are dismissed because they've been accused, they've been indicted for being sexist. So it's the employers who come and talk to us at the law firm because they say that their employees have had inappropriate behavior. And when you want to dismiss someone in Belgium, except for grave error, grave mistake, you need to be able to prove that your decision is based on the behavior of said member of staff or lack of skills, or because there are new reorganization within the company and that position is being done away with. But you also need to demonstrate that a normal employee would have reacted in the same way. So you have two hurdles to overcome. Number one, you realize that when a person is a perpetrator, it's the behavior which is at stake. And so as an employer, you need to demonstrate that facts have occurred and that this has led to inappropriate behavior and that the employer feels it's perfectly normal to take sanctions. And this reminds me of a case I had to deal with a few years ago. This was the construction sector, and there was a member of staff who was working in the office and who was in contact with the administrations about public procurement. And he has clearly had some relationship with a member of the administration. He has used smartphone for stupid kinky reasons, and of course has shared the copy or the videos of some of their intercourse with other members. So for us, this is a first violation, which is extremely serious. The person has a dubious taste, and he has a traineeship here in the office, and he looks at video clips in the on internet, and he sees a video saying, well, next time you're wearing such a short dress, please behave this way and let me know, and do like this person in this video. So obviously we dismiss the person. So you're going to feel that this is perfectly normal, but the person felt it was totally unacceptable to be dismissed for that reason, because it was the notion of humor, the concept of humor. It was just a joke amongst colleagues, and it's not that serious. Now, I've been working for 15 years in the company, and the judge considered that. So after 15 years, you are just kicking me out. No, I'm going to take you to court. I was in charge of this case, and I came before a female judge, and we easily won the case, because she thought it was totally inappropriate on the part of this perpetrator to come and complain, because actually it could have been a dismissal on the basis of serious offense. So you can tell that the courts are getting more and more strict and more severe in the sanctions which are being imposed, and we need to really separate between dubious humor, tasteless humor, and really unacceptable behavior. Number 3, I wanted to talk about, because I'm trying to stick to the allotted time that was given to me. I'm a minority here as a man, so I want to make sure that I'm sticking to the time. So the third topic I wanted to tell you about is Hamou. We were contacted with Pascal Smut by Jump to respond to complaints that were lodged by female fire workers. They are a small percentage of the fire workers, and they felt that they were the object of sexist behaviors. For instance, they did not have proper showers, properly functioning. They had to complain because they did not know where to take their rest, and where men rest, they are in the nude, and so typically you would go and fetch a woman who was trying to rest and confront her with a man who was having an erection. And, you know, I'm not going to go into all the other details, and about doing some sexual acts on the other firefighters. So we conducted an investigation to see what could be sanctioned and what could be changed. And on that basis, I will just take a few aspects that are not part of the report. 80% of the fires interventions are not in the face of fire, but in the face of an ambulance, driving an ambulance. I remember when I was a kid, I was watching TV, and who would be able to escape from a fire, help the lady and the children who are trying to escape from that. But actually, all of those profiles will have to have the same examination to become a firefighter. In countries like Canada, depending on the needs, there will be specific examinations depending on what they will be expected to do. But so there is a change of mental attitude. Also, there has been a survey that has been done on the basis of the complaints. 4 out of 10 firefighters consider that it is perfectly acceptable to have homophobes, sexist jokes. 3 did not know, and so you could easily swap to a majority of firefighters who felt that having misogynist, sexist jokes were perfectly okay. I'm concluding on that pessimistic note, but I am sure that during the second part of the afternoon, we will see that there are solutions to those issues. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for all these experiences. Now, Kris STAPPAERTS, in charge of projects within our non-profit organization, Movement for the Equality Between Men and Women, will present a tool that we developed to inform, raise awareness, and inform about the sexual and sexist behaviors, also assaults. And I'm going to give her the floor with no further ado.
Voilà, bonjour.
So, good morning, good afternoon to all of you. As Donatien explained, I'm working within a movement for equality between men and women, our association, and we present a tool that we developed over the 2 past years. And we have been preparing it for 2 years, and I hope that it will also contribute for the firefighters to decide what they should do. And I forgot to say that this tool was co-funded by the European Union and the region Brussels and the Walloon Region in Belgium. This project was selected in the framework of the Programme of Rights, Equality and Citizenship of the European Commission with 2 partners, the Amazon Carrefour pour Égalité de Genre company, and then PSITEL, which is a cooperative of experts in France who work in the field of prevention of violence against women, and ourselves, the Movement for Equality Between Men and Women. The goals of this European project are to prevent, but also to eradicate sexual and sexist violence at the workplace. So it's sensitizing, inform on the violences against women and the rights of victims, of the witnesses, and consequences of sexism in the workplace. The project also allows to train all people within the company, that is employees, management, human resources, harassment, reference, and union representatives, to strengthen the organization's inclusive culture and the quality of life at work. Also to disseminate the online learning tool as widely as possible within the company. And this is also one of the reasons for which we organized this symposium. And in the booklet we distributed today, you found the documents and the folder with a presentation of the MOOC project, that's the name of the project, and the internet site when you can join it. The tool, MOOC, is an acronym for Massive Open Online Course. So massive means it's a course that is open to everyone, open because the access is totally free to all resources and free access to all resources, the contents of the MOOC. It's online, which means you can connect whenever you want, wherever you want, and from computer, from a smartphone, or whatever this device you use. And then it's a course, because an educational course allows acquisition of knowledge with a quiz at the end, and you can also download a certificate of participation to this course. To give you a small background on this project, the project is based on the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, known under the name of the Istanbul Convention. This convention recalls that women and girls are at greater risk of gender-based violence than men. There are two examples. A study in France in 2018 showed that 87% of victims of sexist acts were women, whereas 91% of the respondents were men. In Belgium, we have similar figures. According to the last Federal Police report for the first half of 2020, 95% of sexual violence suspects are men. In spite of equality defending laws, and in Belgium this is especially the case, our laws are very advanced, there still are inequalities persistent between women and men. And this is particularly true in the labor market. As you all know, the wage gap is still at 23%. Part-time working is very much imposed to women. There are glass ceilings, etc. All these inequalities are based on a system, a patriarchal system, in which all the companies are working, which means a male domination situation towards females present in almost all known societies. This also generates gender stereotypes, which are fixed images of the roles of women. We have, of course, all stereotypes according to our experiences, and this is totally normal. But what we have to fight against is against those stereotypes that may have an influence on our behaviors. In particular, those gender stereotypes are fixed images on the roles of women and men in society. Unfortunately, these stereotypes are entrenched and perpetuate inequalities between men and women. And so the goal pursued by this MOOC is to fight these stereotypes. As I said, sexism and gender-based violence is a characteristic of our patriarchal society, and according to a survey on sexism soon to be over, 2016 survey of JUMP, more than 9 out of 10 women have already been subject to sexist behavior in the workplace. This can take the form of sexist jokes, 83% of the cases, inappropriate remarks, 71%, insults, 24%, wheezing, 9%, physical assault, 9%. For one woman out of 2, she didn't receive promotion because of her gender. In addition, 80% of women say that they're confronted with the phenomenon of mansplaining and mentorrupting, where men interrupt women to explain things or to take over their ideas in a condescending way, thinking that they know more. As a matter of fact, they're simply repeating what a woman said with other words. And more than 3/4 of women have been subjected to remarks about the way they dress. So the prevention and awareness raising on these problematic behaviors in the workplace is therefore the focus of this project. I'm now going to show you a small video clip introducing the project, and then I will go on with my presentation. CITEL, Amazon, and MEFH have developed a MOOC for the prevention of sexual and sexist violence on the workplace. It is for all workers trade unions, and all members of the management of company. Their goals are to raise awareness in the workers on the sexist behaviors, do prevention, and inform. This MOOC is an online course in French, English, and Dutch. You can access it through your computer or your smartphone. And 9 women out of 10 have been confronted with sexist violence at work, according to a JUMP survey, and 95% of suspects of this sexual violence would be men, and 7 women out of 10 have been victims of cases, and 2.5 out of 10, 25% of women have been affected by sexual harassment. Even if sexist and sexual violence are more often directed against women, it also occurs in all kinds of relations: men, women, men, women, women. Sexism, harassment, and sexual aggressions have different consequences on the victims. They have an impact on their health, the well-being, and they are a consequence of the imbalance of power between men and women in our patriarchal societies. It is also one of the manifestations of the big differences between men and women in companies. Employers also have a responsibility for prevention. Otherwise, the law will also consider they're responsible for the facts. This is co-funded by the European Commission, the Walloon Region, and Brussels. There are 5 modules in the MOOC, which aims at raise awareness with the workers on the sexual behaviors, inform about legislation relating to this topic, because harassment is prohibited by law. It also informs on the possibilities of acting. The book was built in collaboration with several European experts from different levels.
Vous pourrez aussi trouver sur le site internet.
You will also find knowledge quiz on internet. If you obtain more than 80%, you will receive a downloadable certificate. We hope to find you very soon on our MOOC site. So that's a presentation video. So let's visit the website now. I'll go together with you so I can show you what it looks like. So the address of the site, you will find it in the brochure that we have included in your folder. Once you arrive at the web page, you first need to register and then connect, verify your email. As I explained, this tool is available in 3 languages: French, English, Dutch. You choose the language you wish to follow the course in. Then the first above you can choose how it works, and you have the first module raises down, gives definitions and explains what law defines, and it presents a context of violence of sexist violence at work. The third one of the procedures for witnesses, how to collect evidence. The fourth module, the employers and their obligations, and the fifth module is about violence of external partners, because the workplace is not only the office. If there's a party organized with external partners, trainees, contractors, all these people that we meet at a workplace are involved, and fight against sexism at work is also true for all these persons. Each module is organized this way. You first have a small introductory video, then you have the experts which are interviewed, We organize this MOOC with French partners, which means that there are experts who are French, others are Belgian, and laws aren't necessarily exactly the same. So we always specify on top of the video, it's Kris DE MEESTER and Vroni Lemeire, who are Belgian. We always explain where the experts come and where they work. And then finally, at the end of each module, you have a quiz I was talking about, who will give you the opportunity to test your learning. And for each module, there is a summary with everything that has been said in the module. The content in the MOOC is downloadable. You can download it in a PDF format. Here you see, download the poster. You can download it, print it, send it to whoever you want. So all the material there is totally available for you. These are the 5 modules, and you have another way of accessing the MOOC. As I said, the access is possible at any time for wherever you are. So you can come in, leave, come back later on. Another way is to use the 10 essential questions. These are also questions that the experts will give an answer to. You may have to click and answer. Another thing you find in MOOC are the resources and tools. You have all the international resources, a text like the Istanbul Convention or the European sources. And you also have the Belgian and French sources, because this is a collaboration with a French partner. Here for the Belgian resources, you find all these listed here. Then you also have a glossary with the main concepts defined. You have also the large version videos. Each expert was interviewed for a very long time, and we selected some passages for the answer to the 10 main questions, but the full versions are available here. And then you have a feedback form. Once you have done the MOOC, you can give your opinion on the tool, and so we can improve it. And you have the information booklet that we included in your folder that you can download in PDF format, print, send out, etc. And then you have the posters that are also included in your folders. On the wall. We stuck them on the wall, so you can see them there. And here they are. No, it's a bit low. So one talks about mentoring, and the other one we can't see right now. And information tools all over the project. We also set up trainings that we gave in our pilot companies, where we used to develop a project, and then all the documents for the training can here be downloaded by the companies if they want to organize internal trainings. And finally, as I said, a certificate of attendance. Once you have finished all the quizzes, you may download a certificate of attendance indicating that you indeed followed all the course and the different modules. So I believe I said everything. You have a version in French, in English, and in Dutch. Videos are also with closed captions. So under titles, you can also see the videos faster if you want to. So I believe I presented the tool. Do not hesitate to register, to discover it. And we really hope that we will reach out to the biggest number of people possible. And we also developed an internet site, which is not the MOOC site. This site is available without registration, where all the contents are available in free access, so the tools, the modules, the legislation, etc., without any password. You will find the address on this slide and also in the folder that we included in our folder. And I finish with a sentence. It says sexual harassment is against the law, period. It's not a matter of it bothers me, it doesn't bother me, as and this is what said Muriel Salmona, a psychotraumatologist in France, who is very active in this field. Thank you very much for your attention.
So this concludes the first part of the afternoon with the presentations, but we can now have a question and answer session. Please speak into the microphone, otherwise interpreters will not hear you and the people who are remote won't hear you. I have a question for Thierry. You said that the person had received a check and had not been dismissed for serious mistakes, but there were three possibilities to be dismissed. Well, the dismissal for for serious offenses have to take place within 3 days, and managers were made aware of his inappropriate behavior much later than the 3 days, and so it was not for serious offense. So he was sanctioned to paying the procedures legal cost. Could you remind us of the various aspects? Well, there is first an aspect relating to harassment and the lack of taking on board complaints by those who hear about it, or by not taking actions once a complaint has been formally lodged. There will be a report sent normally to an external advisor, and recommendations are issued that would not be implemented by the employer. In other words, first he knows about it, knows nothing about it. Second, once a report has been written following a complaint, he receives the recommendations and ignores them. In both cases, there are criminal sanctions and civil sanctions, which means he's liable to paying damages. Thank you.
Je voudrais dire à la dame qui représente la STIB, que faire quand on a déjà été harcelé en tant que femme, moi-même en l'occurrence, 3 fois de façon très violente dans les trains. J'ai porté plainte à la STIB, j'ai été à la police, j'ai fait enregistrer les plaintes. Une a été chez le producteur à nouvelle et elle a été rejetée. Donc, je me suis retrouvée à avoir agi à différents niveaux. Et je n'ai rien reçu comme résultat. même pas des changements dans les travail. Autre chose, je voulais aussi demander, est-ce qu'on considère l'école comme une entreprise? Parce que dans les cours d'école et dans les salles de prof, c'est très fort. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a? Qui? Ah, vous n'entendez pas?
Maintenant, oui.
Ah, bon, le masque. Je vais recommencer?
Non, non.
Alors, dans les écoles, c'est très urgent aussi. Je le sais parce que j'ai été enseignante pendant des années, 30 ans à la ville de Bruxelles, 35 ans plutôt, et je n'ai pas eu de résultats non plus, évidemment. Je parle jusque dans les années 2005, puisque c'est à ce moment-là que j'ai décidé de rompre mon contrat et de ne même pas aller jusqu'au bout des 65 ans. Donc là, je suis lésée aussi. Et j'ai été lésée tout le temps, puisqu'en plus, je suis lesbienne, et vous imaginez que ça n'a pas été du tout facile, et avec les élèves et avec les professeurs. Voilà, c'est ce que je voulais vous dire.
Je réponds d'abord pour la STIB. Voilà, donc, ouais, voilà, vraiment désolée que ça s'est arrivé à vous. Franchement, c'est pas le but de transport en commun d'être harcelé ou d'être victime de n'importe quoi. Le problème est un petit peu que la STIB n'a souvent pas une moyenne d'agir. Donc, on a des agents de sécurité qui peuvent intervenir, mais qui ne peuvent pas vraiment arrêter des personnes. On a des agences multimodales qui peuvent être là et par leur présence essayer d'éviter les choses, d'aider les victimes. Et c'est effectivement aussi pourquoi on veut que les agents sont bien formés sur le terrain pour pouvoir donner les bonnes informations aux victimes pour qu'ils puissent porter plainte. Et plutôt, par exemple, on a des caméras dans les stations, on a des caméras dans le métro, le tram et le bus, mais il faut quand même savoir dans quel bus, à quel temps, à quel endroit. Et donc, effectivement, si on peut motiver nos agents, ça c'est quand même à peu près de 6500, 7000 personnes, si on peut les former pour effectivement donner les bonnes informations avec laquelle vous pouvez porter plainte à la police, ça peut déjà aider. À l'autre côté, je trouve que à Bruxelles, on peut encore mieux collaborer avec, par exemple, la police. Et pour ça, c'est dommage que Madame Benhamou est partie, mais on voudrait bien travailler avec la police, mais aussi pour regarder si on ne peut pas avoir, par exemple, une assistance téléphonique psychologique pour les victimes et qu'on peut tous travailler ensemble pour aider. On voit que, par exemple, le Centre égalité entre femmes et hommes, entre hommes et femmes, entre femmes et hommes, ils ont juste fait un très grand audit chez la police pour regarder comment ils réagissent. Parce qu'on peut envoyer les gens aux polices, mais si la police dit oui, mais ok, on va en PV simple, ou oui, ok, c'est pas si grave que ça, on n'est pas coordonné. Donc, ça, c'est vraiment un effort de tout Bruxelles pour mieux accueillir les victimes et de vraiment donner l'attention qu'il faut à les femmes. Donc,
moi ici, j'habite en Wallonie, j'habite en province de Luxembourg. Donc là, c'est tout à fait un autre milieu et c'est très rétrograde et technologie et l'éducation. Donc il serait temps d'agir là aussi.
Oui, comme je peux vous rassurer aussi, on est en tant que tech pour Wallonie, STIB pour Bruxelles, de Lijn pour Flanders, mais aussi le SNCB. On est en train de
SNCB in the rest of the country. We're trying to coordinate things at a federal level because all of the public transport, means of public transport, need to have one action, but it does not make sense to only cater to one corner of Belgium. So if we have labels in or posters in trams or trains saying sexism or violence stops here, I mean, it does not make sense if we're not coordinating that type of action also to, have a better reaction. we also need a proper training of staff. Staff does not properly react. There seems to be some sort of consensus amongst those who are the perpetrators of harassment on buses, and I travel by bus quite a lot, and I can tell you that there is a sort of complicity among some of the travelers, men, and the drivers, and it's an unacceptable, unimaginable behaviors. Do you have a woman who's an ombuds, who works for the ombudsman? Yes. Yes, it's the mediation. It's the mediation service. She's a new person now, but for instance, wearing a mask on the bus, there were fines that had been intended, 150 euros, but it was never applied. I never saw an inspector on the bus, at least on those that I travel on, 15 kilometers. I never saw anyone giving fines or a driver. Actually, yes, there was one, and it was a lady driver. But of course, then she got insulted by men who do not agree for a woman to give them orders. I'd like to get back to the issue of employers above and beyond what you're saying. We can't hear.
C'est pour les traductions. Ouais. Peut-être qu'il y a un autre micro.
Parlez plus fort.
There are too many microphones that are turned on, probably. All of the microphones are turned on together at the same time, and therefore we cannot hear the one which is being used there.
On ne peut pas les débrancher, ça c'est le problème. On pousse les boutons comme on veut, mais...
Peut-être venez près de nous, madame, comme ça.
Qui doit dire ça?
Oui, venez près de nous. Oui, oui. Comme ça, ce sera plus simple. Comme ça, vous aurez vraiment une réponse en live. Bon, voilà.
Ah, je parle comme ça. Là, ma question était très simple. Il y avait une plaignante, une femme qui était victime.
So there was a plaintiff who had been the victim of sexist criticism. Why did she not introduce or lodge a complaint?
Je pose la question à vous. Et pourquoi, pourquoi elle n'a pas...
So why did she not lodge a complaint? She could have used the legislation, and she had evidence. I am aware of the problems of the 2014 legislation, and but in this case there were means available. Then I have another question about Siamo. Were they complaints, formal reports of those women, and what has been the response of Siamo? I don't know whether you are allowed to tell us about this. Well, regarding your first question, the reaction of the employee who had been the victim of those disparaging remarks was that she wanted to be heard by the employer and she wanted the employer to take measures. She was not interested in getting money. She felt she was a trainee. She might be getting a long-term contract, an open-ended contract, but she wanted to make sure that the values were respected. Indeed, the employer reacted positively, but it is true that individually, the employee might seek more redress. In this case, she felt that the employers taking action was enough. In the SIAMU, we have, if you go on the website of SIAMU RTBF, and you will have a copy of all of the complaints that have been lodged, and it's a highly detailed presentation of all the things I rapidly mentioned. And now it is the government that has to look into it, and the diversity departments have been able to hear the parties formulate recommendations, and then the case will continue at political level within the SIAMU. In other words, upstream, everything has been done to collect the information so that competent people whose remit it is to make decisions can now come to a decision. And the lady is speaking without a microphone, so we can't hear what she's saying. Maybe we can repeat. So the lady was talking about jurisprudence, case law of following the legislation of 2014. Please do speak into a microphone, otherwise interpreters won't be able to hear. Dominique had an interesting question. Was there a complaint? No, people complain but do not lodge a formal complaint. Why not? Well, because, and this is what happened, the formal procedure of complaint lodging is not known, and people do not trust the organization sufficiently to have concrete results. So that's one important aspect. And so there needs to be a code of conduct, but also a process of identification of the type of violence committed, with the process involving a formal complaint known. Unfortunately, this is something that does not exist in most businesses.
I have a question for Mr. Thierry DUQUESNE. You said that in the case that you described that you were happy enough to have a woman judge. Other people do not have this luck. So I wonder if there's a law on the training of judges on sexism. Do you know anything about that? I can't give you an answer. The situation is such that we can only apply the laws that are existing. But I agree with you. We should be doing more, or able to do more. Kris De Meester of the Association of Belgian Enterprises. I have a question for Mrs. EELSING. I know that you work in an environment where you can measure some parameters, but how do you measure the success of your measures internally? We don't have statistics, but I believe that we can talk about success when an action becomes compulsory. and the people that are recently recruited will need to follow the training from the first day on that they work, to not copycat the bad behaviors of the previous generations, or follow the bad behaviors they might find in other workers. I would say success will be confirmed when the amount of complaints are reducing. When women are talking, we understand better what's going on, but I believe that the training should be compulsory. However, we are still waiting for, we are expecting an increase of complaints on sexism because of the awareness raising that we will obtain, because the people will have to react on the situation that they are confronted with every day, and we see that this is something that they have to deal with. The people start by believing there are at the origin of the sexist behavior against them. But if people realize that they are not the origin of the problem, then we will be able to measure the success of our action when the amount of complaints is increasing. Thank you. There are online questions, and the first question is the political world use equal treatment, equal chances, but don't we have a problem with reporting, and aren't we confronted to a risk of meritocracy? Nice question. Nobody dares to take the floor. That's the difference between equality and equity. It's a great and enormous debate. I will take the floor, says Isabella. Indeed, equality of opportunities or equal opportunities is ensure that everyone is dealt with the same way, but two persons that are in a different situation leads to the risk of discrimination. That's why JAM just changed its name. Before our name was Solutions for Equality at Work, and now we are called Solutions for Equity at Work, because equity is giving to any one of us the opportunity to have the same opportunities than the others, to realize that there are systemic inequalities between people, and this is not very easy to make understandable. The second question, parental leave is very often a function of the wage differences between parents. Shouldn't we consider this aspect of the question? Here I can say that in some countries, Scandinavian countries, they take into account the wage gap, and the parental leave is paid as a percentage of the wage, which gives the opportunity to everyone to take a parental leave. Very often it's the man who has a higher wage, so they do not take this leave because they believe that they will be losing too much money at the end. But this applying a percentage puts the balance and allows to have a higher participation of men. I don't know if in Wallonia or in Brussels the situation is different. If everyone has a question, has anything to say, please say so. On education and vocational training, how can we use the example of the ASBR praxis to fight against sexual unpleasant behaviors. On education and training or vocational training, how can we complete repression with training as Praxis, the non-profit organization Praxis is doing? The Praxis is a non-profit organization that is training men that had been sentenced for sexual violence against women. So the idea of this organization is that for women to be able to defend themselves, justice must be reformed, to be listening to the complaints of women, because very often women are not complaining because it's not going to lead anywhere. But if men are sentenced to prison, they will not remain there all the time. So the idea is to induce a change in these men so that they realize what their acts had as consequences, and for them not to repeat this kind of actions in the future. Are we talking about violence or also sexism? And again, the people in the room are talking without a microphone. Violence and psychological violence. Yes, as a matter of fact, Praxis has been introduced in a campaign developed by the Brussels region on domestic violence. And they explained they were giving training to violence perpetrators, and that it reduces the repeat drastically. I do not realize, or I do not know whether there's a similar system for the perpetrators within the companies or within the industry. It would be interesting. And to add on, Praxis is for domestic violence, but they developed a pilot project in line with the law of 2014, because it's a pilot project in Liège with the prosecutor's office and the police to catch perpetrators with their hand in the bag and the in flagranti. And the prosecutor's office of Liège was saying it's a good thing that they're sentenced, but afterwards we have to do something with them. And Praxis indeed already took care of some sexist act perpetrators. The problem for the companies and for the industry is that we want to focus on prevention. It is make sure that this kind of situations do not reproduce within the company. Of course, this occurs after the facts. And the campaign of the Brussels Transport Authority, STIB, focused on that. Nobody is dealt with as a perpetrator, but everyone as a witness, just to make sure that nobody gets becomes or enters into a defensive posture. We deal with everyone as witnesses, and we tell everyone, just look around you, so what's happening, because this generates more cooperation. 12% of women in the company. This is something we cannot do alone. We need the cooperation of the men to have a critical mass which can induce a change. With this project launched on domestic violence, and there's a very good equality center document showing what was going on with women there, and we volunteered to distribute the flyers on this topic, and also for the male perpetrators. So when we see the posters and the flyers, when they see those posters or the flyers, they may maybe take one with them. Yes, I believe it's an excellent question. it really is focused on prevention and not enough on correction. Prevention is of the essence, not only in Belgium. I'm very interested to know what Kris van Onkelen will say about that, because we really have to act at the enterprise level. JUMP is present in France and work a lot on the sexist and sexual violence, because the companies have to have a equality mixity referent once the company employs more than 250 employees, and there are hundreds of people occupying this position. But after the lockdown, we had a director of human resources saying, do you do coaching for sexism against men? We said, well, we never thought about it, but then we started to deliver that kind of service, because we realized that even in the companies saying policy tolerance zero, reality is not true. It doesn't mean that you're going to lay off someone because there's a graduation in violence, and we know how things turn. A policy of zero tolerance means that all the elements must be dealt with and sanctioned, and this is what it means. But in real life, in more than 90% of the cases, and we see this in all the surveys, it's the victim that's going to be moved, that leaves, but whereas the perpetrator remains in the company. And we decided with Patrick Jean, who was interviewed in the MOOC, we decided to do this anti-sexism men against men coaching. And it's not a psychological training, like, you know, you were you were abused when you were a young man by your mother, but it's a training saying we are now at the 20th century, there are things that are not acceptable anymore. You are harming your company, your teams, you need to change your behavior. So it's the kind of accompaniment we thought of. But I believe the question is very good. Prevention is important, but correction also. So we really need a grid with sanctions. I will still answer to 2 questions that we have from the webinar, and then we will have a Q&A question. I said we will still answer 2 questions, but we are a bit behind of time and we need to take a break. So we will answer to the questions later on if we can't answer them right now. There was a question on the tools that we developed for the employers, tools that will ensure that all the employees will follow. The tool that we developed, there is one part which are slides that can be used for remote or face-to-face training, but it's not a training where you are totally autonomous or online. It's with concrete cases to identify the limits. And the slides exist in the online tool, but we can give trainings, and other bodies like JUMP can do so. And the other question was, how can we make sure that these trainings are followed by all the employees, and that these trainings are recurrent? Because if you make a training 3 or 4 years later, people need a refresher. So this is something that the employer must set up for the training of all his workers, like at the Brussels Transport Authority, where it's compulsory, and having refreshers for people to review the concepts once a year. For the online tool, if the employer wants to make sure that all the employees participate, he must take time to do so and invite them with computers in a room with, at the end of the training, maybe a discussion on some items that have been touched upon. But this is something the employers need to take care of. Another question related to Flanders, to know whether the approaches were applicable in Flanders. Yeah, well, we started with the French-speaking, English-speaking module, where now we are ending to develop the Flemish-speaking module. We were, as a matter of fact, funded by the Brussels and the Walloon Federation, but the laws are the same in Belgium. No matter whether you're in Wallonia or in Flanders, so it's perfectly applicable to Flanders, and there's a Dutch version available. So we will take a break now, and I invite you to have coffee, a drink outside of this room, and I do not remember how long we expected to take a break. We will try to limit it to 10 minutes to not have too much of a delay for the second part. Thank you very much.
Sylvie GROLET est licenciée en psychologie clinique.
Sylvie GROLET has been a psychologist, and she's dealing with integration of foreigners, and she coordinates the fight against violence against women. She's in charge of the Wallonia social aspects, and she fights violence based on gender, so prevention, harmonization of statistical data, study coordination, training of speakers, drafting of opinions, and report drafting representing Wallonia on all of these scores. So she's going to tell you more about gender equality policy in the Walloon region. Indeed, gender equality and not gender equity, which is the title of my presentation. So policies, gender equality policies in Belgium are to be framed in an international context. We have the United Nations conventions on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women in 1985. And then in Peking, there was the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action for the Gender Mainstreaming concept. And this has led to the adoption of gender mainstreaming degrees to fight against inequalities. And in Belgium, all levels of governance are impacted by gender equality and will have to rule on this basis. In Wallonia, the decrees which are applicable date back to 2014 and 16 regarding the adoption of the Beijing Declaration, and it has an impact on regional policies and gender mainstreaming. So this is how these decrees are called, the gender mainstreaming decrees. Outside of those, there is more legislation fighting inequalities or other forms of discriminations based on gender. We have the decree of the 6th of November 2008 on the fight against all forms of discrimination, especially those based on gender and other criteria such as pregnancy, birth, and so on. There were some changes to the legislation and some breakthroughs regarding nursing your children, so that women nursing their children would be protected, and they will also benefit from protection when they return to work after having given birth or adopted a child. There is also the criteria of the composition of the family. There is also multiple forms of discriminations. In the past, you could only choose one form of discrimination. Now you can have multiple ones, and discrimination by associations, in other words, relatives of those who are impacted by discriminations can also be protected, and also witnesses can also benefit from such protection. There have been decrees on mixity adopted by the Walloon government. It imposes the presence of maximum 2/3 of members of the same gender in regional advisory bodies, in non-profit organizations in the private sector, and also management bodies of establishment for the elderly, which benefit from operating permit granted by Wallonia. On the basis of the gender mainstreaming decrees, the Walloon government has adopted a gender plan. This is the second one, 2020-2024. And the idea is to integrate a gender dimension in all public policies to redress inequalities which might have appeared between men and women. So this implies or involves all members of the government and the administration. There are 44 measures in all, and 17 different themes: gender budgeting, housing, mobility, urban development, training, and so on and so forth. So we are talking here about looking at the gender composition of the various groups and see the ratio between men and women, see whether the differences can give rise to problems and whether any correction measures have to be applied. So Wallonia is also funding non-profit organizations that are fighting to achieve more equality between men and women. In the fight against violence, we have the EU framework, the Istanbul Convention, which we have mentioned. It entered into force in Belgium in 2016 following ratification. This means that the signatory state needed to establish comprehensive and coordinated policies and allocate appropriate funding and human resources for the implementation of these policies. This is a binding legislation, so that means that if the state doesn't do enough, it could be held liable. So the Istanbul Convention actually acknowledges all of these gender inequalities and acknowledges that it's also a source of violence, because violence against women is a manifestation of the historically unequal power relations between men and women that have led to the domination of discrimination of women by men, thus depriving women of their full empowerment. This means that there are various forms of types of violence, including sexual harassment, regarding the implementation in order to achieve the objectives of the Istanbul Convention. There is a national plan which is in place, and in the Francophone part of the country, we have a plan to fight violence against women. There are 4 strategic objectives, 18 operational objectives, 65 measures, and there is a Francophone contribution by Wallonia, Brussels, and Kokov to the future national action plan. And as you can see, this actually covers the 4 strategic objectives which match the Istanbul Convention objectives depending on the area of competence, so jurisdiction, so integrated policies and data collection, prevention, protection, raising awareness, protecting and support to victims, and follow-up and management of perpetrators. There are also specific measures regarding sexist and sexual violence at work. This is something which dovetails with what STIB has done. There was a campaign organized at Tech called I'm Acting, Be, and these were posters displayed in buses, and it encourages the public to react and respond whenever they are witnessing sexist or gender-based violence or acts. There are two specific measures, one which has to do with violence at home between men and between spouses. And let me give you an example. There are 10,000 agents in Wallonia, and so we are trying to raise awareness amongst them. So we are a large company, so to speak, and so we have a gender plan, and in the gender plan there is measure number 18, which has to do with domestic violence between spouses, and raises awareness of sexual and gender-based harassment in the workplace and in regional public administrations, and they strengthen measures taken at work. Some of these measures have not yet been implemented, but we need awareness campaigns, information geared to the staff, training of staff, and you needed to identify people, human resources, trusted persons, prevention representatives, trade union representatives, occupational medicine, social assistance, department from the ministries. And so the angle here has been developed by SWF is this one. Regarding the other commitments that have been taken by Wallonia, there is the ILO Convention 190 concerning the elimination of violence and harassment at work. It recognizes the right of all persons to a world of work free from any violence and harassment, including those which are gender-based. And Belgium has undertaken to ratify this ILO Convention 190. So you see, it has to go through all the levels of governance. And then there is also a huge amount of work which is being done, politically speaking, at Interministerial Conference on Women's Rights. This was created towards the end of 2019. Christine Moramou, Madame Benamou called for this interministerial conference. And in 2020, it was within the framework of the health crisis. We noted that there was a lot of domestic violence, and so those were the first themes that the interministerial conference had to address. And so we tried to dovetail the different levels of governance to try to remedy the situation. Then the conference also looked at concrete measures to combat sexism in the public space, gender-based cyberbullying and menstrual insecurity, adopted by ministers and governments. This was back in June 2021 of this year. Those measures mean training, raising awareness, information, support to the non-profit organizations that cater to the needs of the victims. Some of you have attended those sessions of the Interministerial Conference about the fight against sexism and what is done at the workplace. Thank you for your attention.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask to Alicia SCHMIT and Vroni Lemeire to accompany me on the stage, to representatives of the trade unions. I will introduce Alicia SCHMIT, who is going to follow what we just heard. She's an interprofessional permanent representative at the CSC Brussels, in charge of the CSC Women in Brussels. To staff and 80,000 activists in Belgium, CSC defends the rights of all workers with or without employment, without job, in the collective representation. They join women, which may be syndicalists or not, and defend the equality between men and women. We are fighting to defend the financial and economic autonomy of women, and also their rights to social security, public services, equality, and respect against all forms of violence. As a syndical trade union permanent, she is the activist where she thinks of campaigns, in particular in the International Day for the fight against violence against women in the 25th of November, and on the International Day of Women on the 8th of March. She also works in the trade unions in enterprises, giving specific support. It was the case with the team of delegates of the Transcom of the Belgian Railways, where she set up the first survey for actions for the violence that the workers, female workers of the railroads were subject to in Brussels. Thank you very much for your invitation, and especially for the magnificent tool you developed. I believe it's really going to be a big asset. I changed my presentation somehow because I thought many things would have been said already. I just wanted to recall that the employers have the responsibility of guarantee the safety of the workplace for men and women of their employees. But as Mrs. Separt said when she presented the tool, the problem of sexist and sexual violence is a systemic issue linked to the system of patriarchal domination. And so, of course, it goes beyond the responsibility of employers. So we have to understand what its origin is to be able to fight it effectively, and see that it's a structural issue that needs structural solutions, that there's a domination stake. So for the CSC, it's an important stake for us to fight this domination. We have to contribute to empower women. So I will give an example of the female workers of tier service, but before, and in this video you will have a testimony of violence, which may maybe ring a bell for the people that are listening. If this is too sensitive to you, may switch off the video for the people that are following us online.
Je m'appelle Marie-Lou. Je suis une ménagère titre service depuis 8 ans.
My name is Marie-Lou. As my man was there, I would never work on Wednesdays. 4 weeks ago, I went to see a new client, Mr. Beep. When I arrived there, he wanted to know me better. He told me about himself for a long period of time. He asked me if I had children. I told him that I was living alone with my 2 children. He offered me a cup of coffee. I asked him if I could do anything. He told me there was not too much to do, that he was able to manage by himself. I didn't understand really what I was doing there. I did the dishes and went back home. At the end of the week, I was called by the agency. The new client was happy with my work and asked me to come back every Wednesday. I accepted greedily, of course. On the following Wednesday, when I arrived, he wanted to show me the paintings he had. It were all naked women. He told me he thought I was very nice and that if I needed some more money, I could pose for him. I went running to the kitchen and started keeping everything in their places. He didn't tell me anything more that day. Last week, I went back to his place, and on my way to his place, I really felt uneasy. When I arrived there, I immediately heard he was showering, so I started working. He came to the kitchen in a bath cap, and I told him to dress immediately or I would leave. He took my arm, he grasped it. When I went back home, I felt so alone. I felt totally helpless. I really needed that job. Maybe it's my fault. I accepted his coffee, to listen to him, to watch his paintings. Maybe there was something in my attitude. Maybe I'll be lucky enough not to find him home today. Wishful thinking, maybe. Hello, Marilou. I'm happy to see you. So, this video clip was prepared by our colleagues which are in charge of the people in charge of cleaning services. And this was a consequence of several complaints that our teams received from our affiliates. And this led to a big survey. And we found out that more than a third of the domestic workers went through the same kind of violence. So very often a testimony brings up more information and gives elements that haven't been stressed enough. We won't be able to fight against violence against women if we do not empower women economically in such a way that they can defend themselves against violences that can be subject on their private sphere or their work sphere. It's not a sufficient condition. We see that in companies where people have good income and stable situation is not enough, but we see that in this case, for domestic workers, you get less than 11 euros per hour. She is afraid of losing a job. And even if they complain, these companies, these agencies that hire them do not want to lose a client. And very often, these companies do not do anything, or they simply move this worker to another place and send another domestic worker to the same user. So this is very important to us, a fight for a stable employment, and in these part-time workers are mainly women, and for wages between workers, female and male workers, the difference in wages is of more than 40%. So when you do not arrive with your wages to cover your expenses by the end of the month, you accept almost anything without protesting. So the first way we can defend women is fighting for this. And that's why this Friday we'll have trade union actions to question the law of 1996 limiting the wages for all workers, males or females, but which is even more dreadful for female workers. So this brings up again the question of the stereotypes and the force relationships. As long as women are not economically empowered, they won't be able to fight this kind of violence. And this is a responsibility that we have, all trade unions, and where the employers and the different governments also have something to say. What tools do we have to fight this violence? We have campaigns and accompany collectively or individually the workers and especially the women. We can also apply the law in Belgium. The legislation with the rights of workers is quite protecting for the workers, but it's very difficult to apply. So what we do is train our activists, men and women who are working on a voluntarily basis to help, and also the trade union teams who can assist their colleagues that are suffering violences. And at the CSC, we also are launching specific trainings on violence against women. You can find them on our internet site. If you write CSC women or Femmes, you will find it directly on Google, and there we show how you can react individually to assist people who are victims of violence, and also collectively with a reference to the multi-annual prevention plans. And we also prepared posters, video clips like the one I just showed you. We also try to assist the union teams in their work in companies. Sometimes with the social dialogue with the employees, everything works very well. We have a team in the Hospital Saint-Jean which is very close to the North Station in Brussels. Many workers take the train there, sometimes by night to go back. So very often aggressions would take place amongst our female colleagues. And the human resources team was very sensitized, and the system of care sharing was set up to go to the station, and there would be a special surveillance by the police for women around those bad hours. For the service titles, it is a bit more complex, especially when there is a competition between different agencies who do not want to lose their clients, their customers, and they are committing somehow to defend their workers. But when the client is always more important than the worker for these agencies. Economically speaking, that is. Of course, there are many other examples, but I only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go even faster. For the Belgian railroad, we also talked with, we made a survey because 2 members of CSC talked to their representatives. These were men, and very quickly these ladies, they realized that the problem was deeper, not only a question of 2 persons, but more extended in the company. So, and there is no figure on the sexual violence or psychosexual risks in the statistics. So we realized that there is a general problem, but we had no element. So we did a survey amongst our affiliates, and there we had 146 answers, which doesn't allow us to really have a generalized figure for all the employees of the railroad. But from these 146 people who answered, 167.8% said that they had been subject to violence or inappropriate behavior on their workplace, and more than 1/3 of them did not dare to react because they didn't have information, or because they were scared or fatalistic. So we also asked what consequences they had to suffer for their well-being. They had stress problems, dermatological problems in their couple, also in their and the way they perform their tasks. So therefore, if this were to grow to management, they might receive a sanction. And so we had a group of women meeting, and those who would have talked with their management could have received very different reactions. Sometimes the reactions were very positive, and the women were told where they could turn to have social and psychological support, and where they could file their complaint, etc. But in other cases, with people that were supposed to protect their colleagues, these people were even degraded even more. So, in particular, for a very grave case of rape, if you're not taken seriously, it will take even more time to recover from the attack. All these discussions led to 4 revendications and have gendered figures for the railroads having easy access to the registers and complaints. This is something that exists in the railroad, the possibility of reporting assaults, but it's very difficult to access this. As a matter of fact, many people do not know exactly how they have to proceed to report an assault. And there's also a campaign of prevention on what is acceptable, what is not, how to react when you're a victim, when you're a witness, what are the sanctions for the perpetrators, and training for all the supporting team, and also for the workers. The diversity on the railroad team already prepared a survey and a brochure, but 3/4 of the representatives didn't know that these brochures didn't exist. So if we do not give them time to do training to our representatives, we have several trainings all over the career. It would be magnificent if these trainings would be able to be done every year. We wouldn't be able to react. We presented these revendications to these claims to different levels in the company, but so far we haven't had any result. There is no simplified access to the complaint registry, and we will still go on claiming, revendicating with the representatives. And if we can't reach our goals with the employers, we will take measures ourselves. And then the last thing I want to say is that we try to accompany the trade union teams in companies intersectorally and interprofessionally. We also fighting along with other feminist organizations, and I invite you to come the 28th of November at the Central Station in Brussels. There may be other demonstrations for the Mirabal demonstration. We've seen that there have been already some progress realized. There are already plans to fight for violence in the different governments. There has already been an interministerial conference on this topic, but we need more funding to go further ahead, to assist, accompany the police forces, justice, so that the complaints get to the end of the road. So very often these kinds of complaints are not dealt with properly. So there's really a need in public service like praxis. And there are many other practices in the different provinces, but we need to train, but we also need funding in order to be able to give a service of quality for prevention and to help those women exposed to violence to restructure their lives afterward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give the floor to Vroni Lemeire, but I'm going to let Inge introduce her. So Vroni has been a political project leader and in charge of promoting gender equality in her trade union. She works in close collaboration with the Women's Committee, Eliane Vogel-Polski, who had been a lawyer and a pioneer in gender equality. This committee, Eliane Vogel-Polski, really is composed of members from different organizations. They deal with issues such as equal pay, gender equality, women policies. She's very active with MOOC, and she was interviewed and she has heard a number of witnesses. Thank you very much, Inge, for those kind words of introduction. And thank you for all those who created MOOC. It's a wonderful initiative, and thank you for organizing this meeting with the social partners and with the trade unions in particular, because I know that all too often we think of the employers, but trade unions also play a very important role in this fight. And I hope that through this presentation you will understand why getting the trade unions involved is so important. We have already seen this in the first presentations. Sexism is something, the consequences of sexism can be felt at personal level. We've seen the case of this lady who was working as a domestic worker, but there has been a U2 study or survey that was conducted, which revealed that women are primarily the victims of sexual intimidation and sexual harassment. So when you're starting in life, it has a terrible impact on your career, on your attitude to work. There are individual consequences, but also collective, because it's a violation of human rights, and it's also a negation of equality between men and women. The fame of the company, the organization, the sector is also important. You know, the trial against Yann Fabre is definitely something extremely bad for his company, and Sforza and all of those examples that have been mentioned in the press. No company really wants to be in the eye of the cyclone, in this case, in the eye of the typhoon, and initiatives need to be made within the organization and within the sector. This is an overview of my presentation, definition of sexism, framework of action, which is a trade union, a feminist approach, and how to fight sexism individually, collectively, and what we've been doing without our trade union and within the framework of social dialogue. So what is sexism? What is sexual violence? What is sexual harassment? Actually, all of those elements are the tip of the iceberg. There are many things, many clues that come before that. It's a sort of escalation, a slow escalation. We say all too often that it starts small with jokes, with an unhealthy climate, and there is a rapid escalation towards sexual innuendos and sexist language and violence even. I'm not going to repeat what Alicia said, but sexism is really based on equal inequalities, gender inequalities, and has economic consequences. But it's interesting to look at where those inequalities come from. Now, back in 2018, the Women's Committee, Eliane Volsky, organized a seminar around the legal context. You might remember Meet Smet campaign. It was a campaign saying sex colleague, ex-colleague. So that was to identify people who had inappropriate behavior. It was brand new at the time, this attitude, and it had quite a lot of success. In fact, a royal decree was adopted in 1992, and therefore the employer became responsible for preventative actions. And in this royal decree, it said very clearly that measures needed to be adopted together with trade unions. The fight against sexism and inappropriate behavior is really at the basis of the current framework as we know it, in terms of harassment at work in general, psychosocial well-being. You remember that there is a new piece of legislation that was adopted. Trade union delegates were part of that reflection group, and the idea was that by considering all the aspects of the theme, the specificity of sexual harassment got somewhat diluted. What the delegates had pointed out was that there was some difference in terms of practice between sexual violence and harassment. Sexual violence means that the person is going to feel upset and fragile, but it's a quite personal thing following a series of behaviors, because the perpetrators actually act together and have a specific approach. It is important, therefore, for trade unions to get involved early on. But what we have noticed is that things were quite fluctuating, because not all shop stewards were involved or were informed. And so what we pleaded for within the trade union was to pay more attention to these cases, so collectively speaking. And then the trade union feminist framework, how to deal with this. Collectively speaking, as Alicia was saying, we have a vast number of inequality cases, and Belgian trade unions in 2004 made a commitment in the gender mainstreaming, which is a political document, which is not an acquis, even though it was signed and has been reviewed. Actually, it is the result of our work as gender officers, gender equality officers, but we want this to be owned by everyone. And it is important to have this fit within a framework of values, which we speak of internally. So it's the fight against inequalities, it's upholding diversity, and so on. I've been working now on the fight against racism. The Brussels Parliament has been working on this, and FGTB Brussels used to say, we want sexism to be treated on a par with racism. But when we attended sessions on racism at the Belgian Parliament, I realized that the problem of racism was just as huge as sexism. It is impossible to fight one without fighting the other. You can't fight that and not fight the rights of the LGBTI community, homophobia, and so on. So it's the fight against social discrimination and social differences. I wanted to show you this slide because I've been working for the Equality Department of FGTB, supported by Actiris. So we're promoting diversity in the trade union and in businesses. And the strength of FGTB, and it's probably the same for CSC, is the workers themselves who share the values. It is the diversity also of the activists who are part of our trade unions. And I must say that very often this is an uphill battle. I mean, it's never easy. You need to fight constantly. And so there is so much tension. You have the far right fighting us, and you're sending shop stewards in the field, and they're confronted with this organization in Ghent, Schild and Vriend, for instance. And in this period of time, many people have told us that people in companies feel that this is not a problem. So this is to say that there was opposition to what we were doing, and we were confronted with that. And actually, those values of solidarities and equalities needed to be upheld simply because they are repressed by a policy based on economics, on economic factors, and things other than the well-being, human well-being. Authorities feel that workers have nothing to gain from it. But when you are practicing inequality, lack of solidarity, and racism, nobody's winning. And so the charter that I was telling you about has been something really important since we signed it back in 2004. But we needed to make sure that it has an impact on the activities organized by the trade unions. In 2014, after being confronted with some incidents, FGTB Brussels and FGTB Wallonia decided to organize a campaign to fight sexism in order to also make sure that feminism would be better known by our activists, our trade union activists. So we had a campaign saying, I'm against sexism because, and here we called on several permanent representatives of the trade unions, and we created some posters, and they were heavily circulated. And you can see Thierry Botson before he became the president, Mr. Tabellini, Vidiansen also is there, president of the public service in Brussels. In other words, this was an important junction to fight sexism. And then there was another initiatives of the ETUC, zero tolerance. This was something about fighting violence. And today, all of the meetings of the ETUC start with a reminder of the code of ethics adopted by the ETUC. And in this code, we indicate what are the inappropriate, unacceptable behaviors, and that there is a procedure for lodging complaints. So this is the result of what we have been doing within the trade union movement. So how do we fight sexism at work? I believe the brochure that JUMP just published is extremely important. Of course, we need individual support. We need information about how to report and lodge a formal criminal complaint. So there are criminal consequences, and this has to be known. And of course, it's not just the victim who can do something. Witnesses, colleagues, and of course, top management should give the proper example. And here I'm referring to people who've been fighting for equality within the trade union. You know, this is a collective fight. We need to be in it together. And so what can we do collectively? We need to pay attention to comments which are made, especially disparaging remarks, gender-based attitudes. And then there is the social dialogue. Let me give you some example. There has been a campaign organized by FOS and FGTB, and this is actually an international campaign, because obviously it's not just in Belgium that we're confronted with sexism. Sexism is something that you find in all walks of life and in all countries. So this is a website which says you need to claim your rights, give us the tools to report those cases, and help the trade union help you. So what are the tools we can avail ourselves of? So this is to get our thinking caps on, to start thinking about the underlying factors. There are multiple discriminations: sexism, racism, precariousness, sexual preferences, and so on. So there was an example which I thought was extremely interesting, which came from the Nordic trade unions. In the catering sector, they wrote a report following a survey regarding risks in the catering industry in their countries. They had noted that the typical victim is the young woman working part-time in the catering sector. So they launched a campaign to raise awareness amongst the public at large. And then an example from Belgium and Europe. The European Trade Union Transport Federation has also embarked on this sort of campaign. So social dialogue is important. We pointed this out. In this sector of activity, women are a minority. They don't really have the possibility of going to the loo, for instance, and they are pretty vulnerable. So they have developed a real policy of fighting sexism at work. And then to conclude, this is something we have already referred to, the ILO convention. It's the Convention 190, Belgium has already a pretty good regulatory framework, but we believe that this particular piece of legislation, this convention, could further improve the existing framework in Belgium. So the Institute drafted a relevant text on this, and let me highlight one element of the convention which is important and which has to do with domestic violence. So this campaign was organized, and it was quite interesting for our work because Convention 190 clearly stated that violence, domestic violence, can also have consequences on the workplace. It said that the workplace can also play a role, a preventative role. So within the framework of the convention, we can pursue our effort. And the Secretary of State, Madame Benaou, referred to this because the workplace is not just the building itself, the venue, but it's also the journey to get to the workplace. And then on the 28th of November, not the 25th, as written here on this slide, we will have a special day. This is our group. And let me conclude with a copy of an article that was published and was a recap of my presentation. Sexual harassment and the fight against it at work is collective. Requires a collective approach, a collective flight. Look at Me Too. People needed to get together and all report what had happened. So we are a lot more efficient when we are together. Obviously, we need to encourage people to report, but women often fear the consequences, especially if they are at the beginning of their career. And many examples have already been mentioned, and I'm again referring to the trainee at the law firm. I conclude my presentation by saying that, again, this is a collective fight, hand in hand with the public authorities, with the employers, with the employers' federations, and I'm now giving you the floor, dear friend.
Thank you very much. I will also let my colleague, oh no, sorry. So I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Kris De Meester, who's a member of the Employers Federation in Belgium. He is the first counsellor for the Center of Employment, Social Security, Competency, Safety, Wellness, and Wellbeing at Work.
Goedenamiddag. Peut-être en français pour après continuer en néerlandais.
Afternoon, I will start in French and then go on in Dutch. Just a couple of words about me. I believe it's important to know that I was already present on this matter when the law of mixed met was already emitted in 2002. The decree was mixed met who defined the confidential counselor as a figure. Afterwards, I was present for the debates on the anchorings law in 2002, which was integrated in the wellness at work law. Here I'm explaining the context in my slide, but the important thing here is to remember that when we ended the discussion on the Convention 190, the violence against men and women in the workplace, or the world of work, I was a member of the small experts committee who embarked on the discussions, and I was very active at that stage. So we may say that I have acquired some experience on this matter, and to see how we can improve things. I believe everyone is looking for this. Now, I'm not too proud about this convention anymore, because I believe that we really missed the train and didn't describe adequately the acts and behaviors we want to eliminate from the work world. The developed countries wanted to include very broad gestures, but in the developing countries, we opened the door to exclude some abusive behaviors for cultural reasons, etc. The countries who ratified, you will find Uruguay, Somalia, Ecuador, Namibia, countries where we all know that fighting sexism and harassment are priorities. And I'm of course joking, but Belgium is going to be a member of this list, but really I believe that we missed an opportunity there. And now I'm going to go on in Dutch with a small anecdote to talk about a exemplary behavior. While we were working in 2016, we're in a tri-party organization, trade unions, employees, and authorities. And during discussions, we had a spokesperson who adopted exactly the behavior that we were all condemning, because he was all through the meeting bullying a trainee, a female trainee. At a certain stage, we wanted to we thought of stop the meeting. And then during the conference, we also observed bad behavior from people at high levels, from embassies, consulates, and also members of the ILO. And so the Secretary General or Director General really wanted to exclude my colleague, who was my superior, because she was a woman. So I believe this is something we may never forget, no matter whether we're talking about people in management. We all have a goal to play. What does the convention say? And this is something that we find in our wellness legislation. We have a sanction mechanism, compensation, risk analysis, measures, training, awareness raising, information training, mechanism for launching a complaint, examination. All these are very classical ingredients, but I must say I don't believe really in this recipe anymore, and I will come back on that later on. You certainly know that at that time the employers were not very happy with this law. There were many articles in the press, were talking about the harassment of oncolings or harassment of the employers, but this law is now a part of the law on well-being. But now the employers do not say anything anymore. They do not say they are being harassed by this law. They have a procedure, they specialized prevention advisors, they have the confidential counselors, etc. But today, nobody is going against the law anymore. Why? Because the law is not solving any problems. So I believe there are many things to be changed. Here you have the only example of a sentence that all the parties are defending. So that was the starting point. Everybody agreed upon that, but on the next step, we had this example that I present in all companies. I say, I do not have to explain to you why this topic is important and why you need a policy on violence and harassment and sexism. It's you who need to decide on that. So when we start working in a company, we do not, I guess, accept cases of violence, harassment, and sexism when we are tolerant to the development of this kind of atmosphere or a environment accepting this kind of mindset. It can be a problem. So if the workers do not feel they can work and complaining about the problems, we're in a problem. There are nowadays many young workers who before applying are checking on the values a company defends. It can be values at an environmental level or human level, and all these values are very important. And of course, human values must be respected. This is the only way to attract talents. Prevention now is of utmost importance. Your colleagues have talked already about it, but I have a slightly different vision. Considering the investigations that we realized, we know that all policies that are opposing certain things, you know, we always say we have to fight against blah, 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 but we know that a project which has a positive connotation in favor of something will allow us to obtain better results with less energy invested. We're talking about tolerance zero. When you fight something, you have to prepare definitions, do reporting, and then you have discussions, endless discussions on all small definitions. And you may never forget that there is always exceptions or specific cases where people do not arrive to reach an agreement. And within the United Nations, by that time, we had meetings on definitions, and we had to interrupt them, these meetings, because the Australians could not accept that blasphemy be integrated in the definition, because this was something that they were using every day when they were expressing themselves normally in their culture. So if we are in such a situation, we can't progress. So if we were going to invest so many efforts in the definitions, it wasn't really worth it. The same thing is true for this zero tolerance, zero accidents at work. I am against this approach, not because I am against the philosophy. I believe the idea at the base is very positive, but very often we are only using some figures. And earlier, somebody said that if we receive more complaints, that means that people are aware of the problem. But if we're talking about zero tolerance, we're only looking at figures and we forget about the solutions that we can use to fight the problem. So you should not look only the figures. Of course, you can ambition a zero tolerance, but if you want to carry out such a policy, you must think that you will need the necessary human resources, the necessary funds, and that everything will be in place to reach this goal. And very often we're talking simply about additional procedures, but my starting point is I am not fighting against something. I try to create a working environment inside which all workers can perform in the best possible way. And this means that we set up everything needed for a good performance, and that all workers are really willing to develop their own skills and their own talents. There are methods allowing the implementation of such an organization where the people can really give the utmost of themselves. But that means that we never accept any form of transgressive behavior. And beside that, and this is an important point, we want a vivid work environment. We do not want to follow the example of the US, where the interprofessional relations are functional, where there is no emotion, no feeling. This is not what we want. We do not want to imitate our American colleagues or what happens in other Anglo-Saxon countries, where you are not even allowed to share an office. And here I want to refer to a very interesting work. The other side of the work that was published by the Randstad agency over several thousands of Belgian workers, and where the soft skills were examined, or soft aspects of the work environment. Can one behave, dress as he pleases? Can one wear tattoos? Does it have any impact on the relationship with the colleagues, etc.? It's a very interesting study, and I do not have all the figures, but in a nutshell, our workplaces are usually kind, user-friendly, kind, and there are many examples of transgressive behavior. And the people are wanting to have a positive culture. 82% of the workers declare supporting their colleagues, and 70% say that their colleagues are supporting them. This means that 20 to 30% of them do not feel supported or do not offer their support. But we realize that the more support there is, the best the people feel at work. And the important thing is that one worker out of 4 says that he has at least one enemy at work. This study used deliberately the word enemy, because it's a very strong word. And one person out of 4 said that he had an enemy, and an enemy that reveals himself very often, very soon in the career, and the amount of enemies increases with time. And the use of this word, such a potent word, means that there are probably transgressive behaviors which can be reciprocal or not. And this allows us to understand a bit better how the work environment is in Belgium. So what can I say on the organization? As a matter of fact, the worker is in balance. He has to develop his skills and show that the working conditions, the wages and safety, ergonomy, lighting, everything is balanced. And then the relation at work, there must be a balance. One of my aspirations at the UNISO and afterwards at the FEB are different. My values have evolved. Now I also have the environmental component, which is increasing in importance. And that's very important to be able to control that relation at work and the acceptable sexual behaviors at work. Everyone has talked about the managers, but if the manager is not playing his role as he should, or if he really became incompetent in such a way that he is not able to detect this transgressive behavior or to get rid of it. When you are not performing as you should or are expected to behave, you will not be doing your job correctly with your colleagues. But I know that our job today is to talk about the transgressive behavior. What is really centered in the presentation is the leadership, respect, trust. I'm going to go a bit faster because I know that we're over time already, but leadership, what are we talking about leadership? The leader is not the one that I believe to be the manager. The leader is the leader of the workers. Leadership doesn't mean the ranking that you have and how you behave at work. The leadership is something that we can all take care of, but when we are at a certain level of the hierarchy, we can obtain more than those that are below in the scale: respect, mutual respect, trust, etc. But such a soft concept has its importance. In the meantime, several methods have seen the light of the sun, and several methods have been developed to obtain results. What do we understand with trust? Trust means integrity, sincerity, reliability, commitment, consistency, competence. All these are aspects that are configuring what we understand with trust. And the soft trust has been converted into a hard skill. The speed of trust is described with 13 elements, from talk straight, demonstrate respect, create transparency, right wrongs, show loyalty, etc. It's something that you really have to practice on your workplace every day, and these are things that we do all together. These behaviors are directed to somebody. It allows us to see where there's something wrong in a relationship. So this is very easy to recognize, and when the management is supporting you for that, and I can't insist enough on the importance of working together in this. When we work together, we can obtain good results with this method and fight sexism at work, which is indeed a unacceptable attitude. I respect, we respect, you give, I receive, I give, you receive. So I just wanted to make this presentation with all the things that we have in the legislation arsenal is not enough. If we want to get rid of sexual harassment, etc., we must go farther, create together a better environment where people feel at ease and have fun working, where they feel they do not have any enemies anymore.
Merci beaucoup pour toutes ces interventions.
Thank you very much for all of these contributions. We are running terribly late, so in terms of questions and answers, I would suggest we continue our discussions during the drink, and I would ask those who attend the webinar remotely to send their questions in the chat room. We had not anticipated with our technician to stay this late, and unfortunately we will have to conclude. Allow me to briefly conclude this afternoon on behalf of all of the associations organizing Amazon and the movement for the equality between men and women. We want to thank all of the speakers of this afternoon. It was a wealth of information, a wealth of experience that they shared with us. We also wish to thank all of the participants for attending in presence or remotely. All the businesses, the trade unions, the civil societies, public service organizations that are taking measures to fight against sexism and sexual violence at work, and who will continue to do so. We certainly hope that this afternoon has been fruitful for all of you and has been a learning curve for all of you, so that you become actors. I want to thank also those who've been working behind the scenes, Inge van der Stiegelen, Virginie Dumoulin, Alphonse Cons, who have worked to develop our new tool, Claire Stapart, Claire, Stéphanie Laurent, Timoné Etterwerf, and we would like to invite you to continue the discussion around a drink outside of this meeting room. We also want to thank our interpreters. It was a pleasure. Thank you. And the technical team, and all of those who work behind the scene and that you do not see here today, who've made all this possible. Thank you, and we'd be delighted to share a drink with you. Bye-bye, good evening.